Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm a programmer and an artist. And today I was going through a bunch of my Blender projects and trying to find geometry node setups I had made that were cool and did interesting things and save them to my assets directory, because I always find later on I want to reuse something but it's hard to find it. And I've tried in the past actually to make a plugin to make saving things to your assets folder easier, because I feel like having a big collection of geometry nodes assets would be super useful. But I mean, I always make a geometry node setup in a specific project file first, and then I don't want to save the whole project usually as an asset. And anyway, but I did a bunch of work today organizing, and now I've got a nice tidy collection of assets I'm quite happy with. I thought I'd go through and show what some of them did, and maybe do some tutorials about them, or I don't know. The first one I want to talk about is curves and UVs. Using curves is super useful. You can do all kinds of stuff with curves. But they don't have UV coordinates. So I have this. This is a bunch of Bezier curves to demonstrate. And I've just used sort of the simplest way you could turn a curve into curves with no thickness into a mesh is curved mesh with a circle. And then I've just put the standard UV Unwrap node in here, and I've picked a random vertex index to be the seam. So I guess that's the first thing you can do that's useful to know, is if you have a circle, you can pick one index of that to be your seam, and then that'll sort of fix a lot of the problems. There are still problems though. It's usually only becomes problematic when you have a lot of curves. But eventually, if this is wood, these are supposed to be wooden handrails or something, you start having some that go where the grain goes across the piece instead of along it. That's one problem. Another problem that is that every time I add, like if I just extrude this out 1,000, well, now the texture's so small that it's basically gone, because it's trying to pack them all in, and you can see that here. This is the UV map it made. So the UV Unwrap tries to space everything out nice. In this case, they don't actually care about spacing everything out nice and giving each island its own space in the map. I have this rope texture here, and so I actually want to pick 1/5 of the texture to use as the UV coordinates. So the way you can do that is you have to build the UV vector using some logic. So that's the first node group I have, curve Solidify with UV coordinates. All right, so the way this works is similar to our simple example of sweeping a circle along the curve. We're going to do the same thing here, but as we do it, we're also going to generate UV coordinates. So you can see here we have curved mesh. It's sweeping the circle along the curve, and we're allowing you to edit the resolution of it or the radius. The way we can generate the UV coordinates is we can, before we sweep along the curve, we can capture the length of the spline. Then after we've swept the circle along the curve, we can still use that value. And that'll give us the U coordinate of our UV coordinates. And you can see it starts at 0 on the one end and it goes up to however long the curve is on the other. And that also solves the problem of the scaling, because it'll just go off beyond the 1 unit of the UV space. It'll tile. So that's the U coordinate. Then we have to calculate the V coordinate, which is a little trickier because it goes in a circle and the circle repeats. So we need to pick a seam to create along one of the edges somewhere. The way we can do that is by capturing the index of the vertices of the circle, again, before we sweep the circle along the curve. And then after we've swept the circle along the curve, we can transfer that value to the faces of the... Now, if we do this directly, it doesn't work correctly. I think it like averages them or something. I'm not sure what it does. But we need to pick a single vertex of all of the faces vertices to use for each face. So that's what this capture or count faces group does. We're starting with the index of our face. We're going to get the corners of that face. That has 4 of them, so we're going to pick the first corner, and then we're going to get the vertex at that corner, and then we're going to read the value that we created before we swept the curve for the index of the circle off of that vertex. And then we're going to capture it on the face. And then after we've done that, again, this if you try to do it directly on the face corners, it doesn't work. So we have to first capture it on the face and then transfer it to the face corner. Then the next thing we need to do is, that's like halfway there, we have a step that goes up and around, but we want it to be a smooth gradient. So the way we can do that, so each of these increase by 1, so this is 0, 1, 2. So if we create a gradient from 0 to 1 that goes across the face, and then add that to our incrementing index, then we'll have a gradient that goes all the way around, and it'll be one seam where it starts and ends right here. So we can do that just by checking which index a vertex of the face is. And that looks like this. So we just say if it's vertex number 1 or vertex number 2, it'll be true or white 1. And otherwise it'll be black or 0. So we'll capture that also on the face corner, and then we'll add them together, which looks like this. You can see it goes all the way around, and that's our V coordinate for our UV coordinates. Let's get rid of all of these. All right, so then that goes from 0 to our resolution. So in this case, the resolution is 8, so it goes from 0 up to 8. So then we're going to divide everything by our resolution, which makes it go from 0 to 1, which makes the UVs more usable. Then we're going to combine X, Y, Z, store a named 2D vector on the face corners. That's our UV coordinates. And then optionally set it smooth. So that's our final mesh with the UV coordinates. You can see it mapped the texture nicely. And if we look at our UV coordinates, they are nice and square and fit perfectly inside of 1/5 of our texture. And if we transform them, we could slide it over to a different texture or whatever we wanted to do. So that's a quick overview of how the Curve Solidify node works and how it creates UV coordinates. That's super useful for all kinds of things. You can also do the exact same process on a custom shape that you sweep along the curve. In this case, I resample it to get the count of how many vertices there are. You could also just count. You could just evaluate the curve and then count them. That would also work. I've got another one here that makes a rope, twisted 3-strand rope, if you have it high poly, or it does a similar thing to the Solidify Curve if you have it on low poly. I've got this beam generator is a useful one. It just creates a beam between two things and adds some random variation, which is useful if you just want to have some nice looking boards. And then I also have in here a node group that wraps stuff with rope, which is pretty cool. And it'll hang ropes between things if you, depending on what seed you have. And it can make some pretty interesting looking things super easily. And that uses this sort of building block piece, which is edge sag. It just takes some edges as inputs and then sags ropes between them. So those are some other ones I've made. I try to make everything have UV coordinates and be able to be textured using UV coordinates because that's what I find most useful, since I'm typically making game assets with it, and they need UV coordinates. So you can't get away with tricks like just using triplanar mapping or procedural textures or stuff like that as easily. So yeah, that's what I've been organizing and putting together today. These are all the nodes that I got around to making an icon for and cleaning up and naming. They're not super pretty. I didn't put frames or notes in any of them, but I'm gonna make them available on Gumroad. You can download them for free if you want and test them out. If you're interested in knowing more about how any of them work, or ways to do different things, ways you could use, like curves across lines and curves along lines are great for making fences or boardwalks, or, I don't know. I think the node groups are super useful when they do sort of simple tasks and you can chain them together, or you can add them as modifiers. I don't, for some reason I haven't ever made one in an asset yet, but in almost every Blender file I have a node group that's just like set material or realize instances, and you can just add that one node as a modifier essentially. Another one, random island values, super useful for material stuff. If you just have, say you're going to make a texture and you want your texture to be a wood floor, right? You could have, you could make some planks. You can make them all nice and random. We could turn the randomness down a little bit so that they fit closer together. Push these together here. Slide it over. Make it a floor. So that's cool, but they're all exactly the same. Then you can go to your modifiers and you can add the random island value. And then in your shader, when you have your color, you can just do like a mix. Maybe set it to soft light or something, or overlay or multiply. And then you can attach that to an attribute and you can look for random. Which just gives you a random value for every single mesh island in the mesh. And just like that, you got varied planks. So yeah, those are the nodes I've got in there so far. I have a ton more I need to pull out and make assets so that I can reuse them more easily. But I'd say simple building blocks are the best because you can put them together and make more complicated things. Complicated setups are great, but they just do one thing, and then there's less. The more specific you make something, the less and less uses it has. So yeah, like I said, I hope this was interesting, and the nodes are available on my Gumroad page for free, or if you want to give me something for them, you can do that as well. And then yeah, if there's something about these node groups or something similar that you'd be interested in knowing more about, let me know.